People who have survived a murder attempt by dumb luck. What's your story? Story 1. Thank God for my nosy neighbors. I always used to hate how nosy they were until this happened. When I was about 10, I was riding my bike outside. My parents always let me ride my bike during the summer, but only up and down the street we lived on. One day, a man in a van was parked across the street. He called to me, asking if I had seen his dog and if I could help him find it. Me, being a naive child, agreed to help him and started walking toward his van. My neighbor, an older white lady, came bolting out of her house, hooting and yelling, telling the guy to back off. The man hurriedly got back into his van and drove off. It wasn't until many years later that I realized how dangerous that situation could have been. Story 2. When I was about 10, my grandfather was dying from complications of heart issues and mental deterioration. I didn't know him very well, as the last time I'd been in contact with him was when I was a baby. My father never liked him and didn't bother coming with me and my mother to visit him in the hospital. When we got there, he was resting peacefully. My mother leaned in and whispered some words to him, I imagine about his health. I hung back a little because the old man, whom I didn't recall ever meeting, really freaked me out. Regardless of my anxiety, my mom said I should approach Grandpa and share some kind words with him. I understood from how sad she was that I shouldn't argue, so I stepped forward and did as she asked. He didn't seem conscious at all, so I just whispered some nice things to him, like my mom had done. Things took a terrifying turn when mid-sentence his eyes flew open and locked on me. My heart dropped when I saw the pure hatred in his gaze. In a sudden movement, he bolted upright in bed, wrapped his hands around my neck, and started choking me as hard as he could. I barely remember what happened next. My mom was screaming for a nurse while my grandfather kept yelling at me, shaking my neck violently, shouting, "You betrayed me! You betrayed me!" And then he died. As quickly as it began, it was over. His grip loosened, and he flatlined. My mother was inconsolable, and I was crying in shock and confusion. Later, after things had calmed down, a nurse explained to my mother that his severe dementia had left him barely coherent, and he likely mistook me for someone else. Years later, my mom told me she believed he saw my father in me. My father had been an abusive, alcoholic womanizer in my earlier childhood, and my grandfather deeply resented him. I guess I look a little too much like my dad. Story 3. I was a bouncer at a club in LA for a while in the 90s. One night, I stopped some clearly gang-affiliated guys at the door after they refused security checks. After a few minutes of them threatening me with all sorts of warnings, they left. Later that night, the club started to wind down. It was slow, and since we were overstaffed, I started drinking a bit. I wasn't wasted, just buzzed and sleepy, so I told my buddy I'd go lie down in the back seat of his car for a bit. A few minutes after lying down, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. I got out and stumbled to a quiet spot between a guard booth and a building for privacy. I was about 25 feet from the club's entrance, just off an alleyway. As I was relieving myself, a guy ran past me, darted around the guard booth behind me, and unloaded a 9mm into the back seat of the car I had just crawled out of. Bam, 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 bam. He fired multiple shots into the car. Then he turned, ran right back past me, and disappeared down the alley into the night. I don't think he even saw me. Nothing much came of it, except my buddy was convinced I was a marked man and avoided me for over a year. Edit. This happened in Los Angeles when I was about 25. I'm almost 50 now. Some specifics are fuzzy, but I remember my friend was genuinely terrified. He thought it was part of a larger conspiracy to have me killed, not just a random act or gang initiation. He even ditched the car and wouldn't take my calls. For those wondering, the car was an old, rusted-out sedan worth maybe $500. Details about the number of rounds were relayed to me later by third parties. People in the neighborhood talked about it, but nothing else ever came of it. Honestly, though, this wasn't even the first time I'd been shot at. Life has been a strange trip. Story 4. This is a throwaway account because it got some media attention. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I was representing a client who had embezzled almost $500,000 from his business partner. He was facing several years in prison. Many of his assets had been seized by the government, and he was being sued by multiple creditors for over $2 million. On top of that, he was in the middle of an ugly divorce and wasn't allowed to see his kids. The guy was under a lot of pressure and had started drinking heavily and using coca. I used to get incoherent phone calls from him in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to sobbing. One day, he came to my office and asked to see me, but I was in court. My secretary said he was perfectly civil. After leaving my office, he went to his divorce lawyer's office and shot him to death. He was stopped by police a short distance away and wounded in a shootout. Later, he told the cops that he had come to my office intending to kill me as well, and also planned to shoot his civil attorney. Story 5. Our neighbors growing up had 3 kids, the same ages as me and my siblings. We were all friends and generally got along well. Their eldest child, who I'll call Peter, had Asperger's syndrome and was known to have outbursts, some of which could be violent. One day when I was 5 or 6, our moms decided to take all 6 of us to a nearby wading pool because it was a hot day. The pool was crowded, with a lot of other kids around, and although there were 2 lifeguards on duty, they were mostly chatting and not paying much attention. I was off with my neighbor's daughter, who was my age, and Peter. For reasons I don't remember, Peter suddenly got upset and decided I was at fault for something. He was about 8 and much bigger than me. He grabbed my head and held it under the water. I remember everything about it, the burning need for air, the panic as I realized I couldn't breathe, and the sheer terror of thinking I was going to die. I fought as hard as I could, but I wasn't strong enough to get him off me. Then I remember seeing my mom's face, her expression a mix of terror and fury. The next thing I recall is Peter sitting off to the side, his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking back and forth while his mom tried to calm him down. My mom, meanwhile, was absolutely losing it on the lifeguards, screaming at them for failing to do their jobs and letting her daughter almost drown on their watch. To this day, I have a fear of swimming and hate having water on my face, even in the shower. Story 6. I was abducted at a gas station during undergrad. The locks on my car were broken, and as soon as I got back in, a strange man climbed in and forced me to drive him to an ATM. I was paralyzed with fear, so any sense or reasoning I had completely went out the window. He claimed he worked at Wendy's and said that for my generosity, he'd give me all the Wendy's I ever wanted. On the way to the ATM, he showed me pictures of his daughters on a clearly stolen cell phone. Then a Whitney Houston song came on the radio, and he started bawling his eyes out, screaming, "Why do all the good people have to die? Only bad things should happen to bad people." When we got to the ATM, I withdrew cash and gave it to him, thinking it was over. But he made me get back in the car and drive him somewhere else. As we passed by some train tracks, I thought, this is it. This is where he's going to kill me. He asked what I was studying in school, and I told him biochemistry. He replied, "I believe in jet propulsion and all that *T. We are not alone. Aliens are among us." Finally, he told me to pull over at another gas station and said, "Drive away, sweetheart." I immediately called the cops. I had to participate in a lineup and found out this man had done the same thing to multiple women, some of whom hadn't been as lucky as I was. Story 7. My supposed best friend decided that my wife and I were too perfect. He believed it was all an act and concluded I must be secretly abusing her. One evening, he was over at our house. I had cooked a great dinner and we were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. At one point, I went to the kitchen to put some glasses away. When I came back, I leaned on the couch with him slightly behind me to my left. Suddenly, I heard a loud thunk and felt an unbelievable amount of pain on the top of my head. He had picked up a whiskey bottle from the table and smashed it against my skull. At first, I was completely confused, wondering what the hell was happening. Then I noticed the blood pouring down my face. Not wanting to get blood everywhere, I stumbled to the kitchen. Meanwhile, he was pacing back and forth, muttering incoherent things. I thought about grabbing my gun, which was nearby, but I wasn't thinking straight due to the concussion. Thankfully, he left before things could escalate further. I ended up with a severe concussion and still suffer from its side effects to this day. My number 2 goal in life is to outlive him, just so I can crap on his grave. Story 8. I was 18 at the time, walking home at night after meeting a friend. My house was only 10 minutes from the train station. After a few minutes, I noticed someone was walking behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, but started walking faster. Then I realized they were catching up. That's when I started imagining scenarios of how I would defend myself if attacked, but I never actually thought it would happen. Then I felt something hard hit the back of my head. My immediate reaction was pure rage. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was filled with anger as we wrestled, and eventually I ended up on the ground. He climbed on top of me and started strangling me. I tried clawing at his eyes, but it didn't work, and I began to black out. Suddenly, a thought popped into my head. Wake up, or you will die. Adrenaline surged, and I opened my eyes, screaming as loudly as I could while fighting back. That did the trick. He got up and ran away. I lay there for a few seconds before bolting home, still screaming. My mom, already at the door, opened it for me. My screams had woken her up. Or maybe it was just motherly instincts. She called the cops immediately, and they arrested the man that same night. It turned out he had shot me in the back of the head. The bullet didn't penetrate my skull. It just got stuck. They never figured out why the gun malfunctioned, but I'm thankful it did. The man later admitted to police that he had been following me for some time, but never had the courage to go through with it. His plan was to kill me and rape my corpse. I know this story sounds wild, but I have Swiss newspaper articles to back it up if anyone's curious. Story 9. I was leaving a bar after last call with a friend who was a medic. We noticed a girl lying in a snowbank near a telephone pole. She had just been hit by a car. We ran over to help. Other people were already on the phone with 911. And since I didn't have any medical training, I just stayed to provide support. As I turned around for a second, I suddenly heard people screaming. I spun back to see a minivan barreling toward us. Most of the others managed to run, but I wasn't quick enough. The driver hit me, reversed, ran over me again, then drove forward and ran me over a third time. It turned out the driver was high and drunk. He had gotten into a fight with the girl's boyfriend, who happened to look a lot like me. The guy thought I was him. 9 years later, I'm still dealing with the medical aftermath of that night. It completely derailed my life, but I guess I survived. Edit. For those asking about the driver, an off-duty cop witnessed the entire thing and wrote down his license plate. The man was apprehended 20 minutes later and charged with attempted murder, among other things. Despite his long history, including killing someone in a previous drunk driving incident, he pleaded out and served only 3 years in jail. How the justice system thought that was appropriate is beyond me. Story 10. When I was around 12 or 13, I took a lifeguarding course at a local pool with a friend. The class had about 16 people, ranging in age from 12 to 18, but most of us were in the middle of that range. There was one guy, around 16 or 17, who immediately gave off unsettling vibes. He was quiet, socially awkward, and had a solemn, almost brooding demeanor. My friend and I couldn't help but make jokes about him between ourselves, calling him a school shooter type. It wasn't meant to be cruel, just a reflection of how uncomfortable he made us feel. About 2 hours into the class, we transitioned from pool instruction to a classroom session and had 20 minutes to change. While in the changing room, my friend and I noticed the guy intensely staring at us. It was unnerving, and we avoided making eye contact. But when my friend accidentally locked eyes with him, the guy screamed, "Stop looking at me!" and pulled a switchblade from his bag, lunging at my friend. My friend managed to block the knife with the locker door and sprinted out of the changing room. The attacker then turned his attention to me and started chasing me. Panicking, I ran through the bathrooms, the showers, and onto the pool deck, slipping and sliding on the wet floors the entire way. At some point, I turned around and realized he was gone. I ran to the lifeguard office, half-dressed and in shock, and told the instructor what had happened. To my disbelief, he didn't believe me and accused me of lying and bullying the guy. I insisted he help me find my friend, and when we got to the lobby, we found my friend surrounded by concerned parents. He had a 6-inch gash on his forearm where the knife had caught him. The instructor immediately called the police, and the building went into lockdown. The attacker was nowhere to be found and never came back to the class. I assume he was eventually arrested, but I never heard what happened to him. This experience taught me to always trust my instincts about people. Sometimes they turn out to be right. Story 11. I was traveling by train across Eastern Europe, and due to running low on money, decided to ride in second-class seating despite warnings that it wasn't safe for a woman traveling alone. Making matters worse, I sat alone in a compartment meant for 6 people, a mistake I'll never repeat. At one stop, a drunk man boarded the train and entered my compartment. For some reason, he thought I looked like his ex-wife, and he attacked me. I was unable to scream, but fortunately this particular stop was at the border between 2 countries, and border patrol officers from both sides were on the train. The compartment door was open, and within moments, at least half a dozen uniformed officers jumped in and pulled him off me, saving my life. I was hospitalized for a while, but made a full recovery. During the trial, one of the officers jokingly asked if I wanted them to hold the guy down so I could hit him. Thinking he was joking, I replied, "No, go ahead, you do it." To my surprise, they took me seriously and were about to act on it. I quickly stopped them, but it was clear they were deeply offended that someone from their country had attacked a young female American tourist. Tourism was a significant part of the local economy, and this man's actions were seen as a disgrace. While the experience was terrifying, the kindness and swift action of the Border Patrol officers restored a little of my faith in humanity. Story 12. This happened many years ago. I was a lead man at a factory when a girl started working there, and I took an interest in her. Over time, I learned she was in a terrible drug-fueled abusive relationship. Every night, I told her to call me if she needed help, and I'd come get her. After months, she finally called. I went to get her and brought her to my house. Her ex wasn't happy about it. For the next 2 years, he harassed and threatened us nonstop. A few months after we got married, my wife and I went out for a few drinks. By coincidence, her ex was at the same bar. He came over and apologized for the harassment, and it seemed like things might finally be over. We sat outside talking with him and a few others. The next thing I remember, I was on the ground, someone choking me. I had no idea what was happening. I tried to fight back, but I'd been blindsided and they were on top of me. I couldn't break free. Everything started to go black and I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment, I thought it was over. Somehow, I managed to grab hold of their head and pull them off of me. My wife and I ran to the car and got away. A week later, my wife had been asking around and talking to anyone who might know what had happened. It turned out her ex had paid 2 people $50 to kill me that night. Story 13. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, in a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The area reeked of trash, with large metal cylinders sticking out of the ground to vent gas from decomposing garbage. One day, while walking down a dirt path with another volunteer, 2 men approached us. They were acting strangely, but I assumed they were drunk or high. Many in the area drank rubbing alcohol because it was cheaper than beer or liquor, and it seriously messed with their brains over time. As they got closer, one of them became overly friendly, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a happy drunk, but my instincts told me something was off. I gently but firmly pushed him away, trying to keep it lighthearted so I wouldn't seem like a rude foreigner. This went on repeatedly as we walked down the path. He'd try to get close, I'd push him away. Finally, we reached a fork in the path and went one way while they went another. When we arrived at a house we were visiting, we mentioned the encounter to the locals. Their response chilled me. "Oh, everyone here knows that guy. That's his routine. He acts friendly, puts his arm around you, then pulls out a knife and stabs you in the stomach." I came that close to being stabbed to death. Story 14. I'm not sure if this counts as an attempt, but it's terrifying nonetheless. My wife, kids, and I went to church one Sunday where we ran into one of her old flings. He kept following her and our daughter around trying to talk to them. I confronted him and told him to back off. As we were leaving, he yelled across the parking lot, saying goodbye to my daughter. My wife forced me into the car, and we drove away. I later messaged him on Facebook, asking what his problem was. He told me my wife and daughter were his friends, and that I had no right to tell them who to associate with. I told him again to back off, or I'd call the police. The following Sunday when I was working, I got a call from the pastor. The man had shown up at church looking for me and caused a scene. The police were called, and when they searched his backpack, they found a sawed-off shotgun, a meth pipe, and meth. It's terrifying to think what could have happened if I had been there that day. Story 15. When I was 19, I was driving through Johannesburg, South Africa during rush hour. My car, an old Golf, was packed with my sister and 3 friends. As I was rolling up my window, 4 men approached and surrounded the car. One of them reached in, turned off the ignition, and tried to grab my keys, yelling, "Phones and wallets now, or you die!" Instinctively, I grabbed his arm and held on, fighting to keep the keys. He pulled away and came down hard on my arm twice. The second hit caused something to snap, and I let go. The man fled with his group, and my friends jumped out of the car to chase them. I found my keys lying on the road just outside my door, but I couldn't drive because my arm was broken. I moved to the back seat as one of my friends returned, his shirt covered in blood. He jumped into the driver's seat and sped off like a madman. It wasn't until we were on the road that I noticed the blood everywhere, on the seats, the windows, and me. I realized I'd been stabbed twice in the arm, and the second stab had severed all the tendons in my forearm. Thankfully, I had a roll of bandage in the car. I wrapped my arm as best I could, and we made it to the hospital 20 kilometers away in rush hour traffic. I was in surgery within an hour and fortunately fully recovered with a scar and about 95% mobility. Story 16. When I was 16, 2 weeks into my first job at a smoothie shop, we were robbed late one night. My coworker's friends had been playing pranks on her all day, so when someone burst through the door, I assumed it was another joke, until I felt something metal pressed against my back and an arm wrapped around my chest. The robber barked the stereotypical "give me all the money" line and forced us into the back room, ordering us to kneel and face the wall. As I knelt, hearing him move closer, time seemed to slow down. Luckily, I had been refilling juices earlier, and a heavy cart partially blocked the back room door. The robber, likely on something, couldn't get past it and fled. My coworker's husband chased him and caught him outside. When the police arrived, they found the man holding an industrial-sized pipe wrench wrapped tightly in his fist, likely to strengthen his grip for swinging it. Years later, I found out he had stabbed his cellmate multiple times in prison. I'm still unpacking this incident in therapy. It's why I avoid walking in cities at night or sitting where I can't see the door. Story 17. As a lifeguard, I was once called to a medical emergency at a condo near the boardwalk. Although it was unusual for us to respond to non-beach calls, we were closer than paramedics. So I grabbed my kit and headed over. When I arrived, I knocked, identified myself, and entered. Inside was a younger man, clearly on drugs, with blood around his wrists. He stared at me, dumbfounded. I started asking what the problem was when my supervisor suddenly walked in, grabbed my shoulder, and pulled me out of the condo. It turned out the man had called in saying he wanted to commit suicide and had threatened to kill anyone who entered. I should never have been sent there without police backup, and the situation led to a serious review of protocol. Story 18. In my late teens, I used to buy weed from random dealers in low-income housing projects. One day, we gave money to a guy named 40 who went inside to get the weed. As we waited in the car, a group of coked-up white guys pulled up beside us. My friend apparently owed them money, and they pointed a gun at him, yelling that if he had money for weed, he could pay them back. I was terrified, convinced they were going to shoot us and drive off like nothing happened. Just then, 40 came back out with our weed and a much bigger gun. He scared them off, and we followed him back to his apartment, where we smoked a blunt to calm down. Turns out 40 was only selling weed to support his 6-year-old daughter and give her a better life. I ended up babysitting her a few times that summer. I hope she had a decent childhood and that her dad stayed safe and out of jail. Story 19. When I was around 12 years old, I was riding my bike home at sunset from a friend's house. I passed by the community pool, which had been closed for a few months, and noticed a car parked in the lot with a man inside. I didn't think much of it at first and continued on my way. As I cut through the local elementary school parking lot, which had gates, I got about 20 yards past the gate when I saw the same car pull up at the bottom of the lot. That's when my spidey senses started tingling. The car backed out, but I kept moving cautiously. When I approached the teacher's parking lot, I saw headlights. Peeking around the corner, I realized it was the same car again. I turned my bike around and started going the long way around the school. He noticed me and got back into his car, driving slowly. I found some bushes to hide in and watched as he drove up and down the front of the school, clearly looking for me. Another car drove by, forcing him to move his vehicle out of the way. That gave me a chance to race up to the street and dart into a random open garage. I stayed hidden in the garage, my heart pounding, until I felt it was safe to peek out. I didn't see him, so I decided to make a run for home. Just half a block later, he turned the corner and spotted me again. Panicked, I veered into a random lawn, ran up to the front door and yanked on the handle. To my immense relief, the door wasn't locked. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me, and startled the elderly couple sitting in the living room. I told them a man was trying to get me, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. As I watched from the window, the man just sat in his car, staring at the house. When the older man got up to look, the guy finally drove off. After waiting about 10 minutes, I got back on my bike and bolted home as fast as I could. My parents didn't take me seriously either, brushing it off as me being dramatic. I was in shock and didn't talk about it for years because it was too traumatic. Even decades later, I still have a crystal clear image of that man staring at me from his car. When I confronted my parents about it as an adult, my mom broke down in tears, realizing how serious the situation had been. Story 20. My husband and I live above our business. One night, around 3 a.m., our alarm company called to report a motion detection alert in an unusual spot. Assuming it was just a mouse, we went down to check it out. My husband ended up face to face with a burglar trying to escape through the window he had broken. The man ran back inside, and as I called 911, we heard a chaotic commotion of crashing and smashing throughout the building. The burglar climbed a 10-foot iron gate, smashed through 2 sets of commercial-grade glass doors, and made it outside again. Fueled by adrenaline, my husband chased after him, tackled him to the ground, and pinned him down. I was narrating everything to 911 while running outside in just a tank top and panties. As I stood about 15 feet away, a minivan screeched around the corner. It was the burglar's girlfriend and getaway driver. She yelled, "Get the F*** off him, or I'm running your B** over." And then she tried to follow through. She gunned the engine straight at me. I barely jumped out of the way in time, screaming and throwing my hands up in shock. The burglar managed to jump into the van and they sped off. However, he had bled all over my husband during the scuffle, leaving enough DNA evidence to identify him. Combined with partial plate information, they were both eventually caught and are now in prison. Story 21. When I was 15 or 16, I was at a party and stepped out onto the balcony for a smoke with someone I'd been talking to. There was already a guy out there and we started chatting as a group. My friend eventually went back inside, leaving me with the guy. He seemed a bit off. He mentioned he had been in the army but got kicked out. Then he pulled out a big knife and handed it to me. I looked at it briefly and gave it back. That's when he pushed me against the edge of the balcony, put the knife to my neck and said, "Do you know why I wanted to join the army? I wanted to kill people, man. People just like you." He made a slicing noise with his mouth, then started laughing and pulled the knife away. I went inside, grabbed my girlfriend, and locked us in a bedroom. Later that night, he smoked a lot of meth, started kneeing holes in the wall, and tried beating down the door. I slept with my own knife under my pillow. The next morning, he acted completely normal, except for the fact that he had cut his jeans into short shorts. Looking back, it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Story 22. When I was 8, my sister had a friend I always got bad vibes from. She was 10 and liked to pick on my little brother, but I always stood up to her. One day, we were at a lake swimming. I went out to the deep, roped-off area, even though I wasn't a strong swimmer. Her behavior became odd. She laughed strangely and kept getting closer to me. Then she pushed me off a wooden pole I was holding onto. I got scared and started swimming back, but she came up behind me and pushed me underwater. It didn't click at first that she was trying to drown me, but by the third time she aggressively shoved me under. I realized what was happening. Something in me snapped. I let myself sink, swam underneath her, came up behind her, and grabbed her hair. I shoved her face into the water, pressing my legs against her back so she couldn't rise. I let her up only when her struggling slowed. She looked panicked and swam back to shore. When I told my sister she and I confronted her together, the girl just said in a dazed monotone, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would be like that." It was only later that I realized what she meant. She was apologizing for trying to drown me, acknowledging she didn't understand how horrible it would feel until it happened to her. Story 23. When I was in college, a man high on meth and acid broke into my apartment. He was convinced he had lost his glasses inside. I was washing dishes when the door slammed open and suddenly he was behind me, choking me. As I started losing consciousness, I grabbed my roommate's acrylic bong and swung it over my shoulder, hitting him in the face. The bong broke, but it didn't faze him. Desperate, I swung again, using the jagged edge of the broken bong. The second hit tore into his scalp and cheek, leaving part of his face hanging off. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, the floor, the ceiling. He ran out of the apartment, leaving a trail of blood through the snow. Police found him passed out in a cemetery. He needed blood transfusions and was eventually charged with assault, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. He went to jail for 4 years. Story 24. When I was 14, I found a cheap secondhand guitar for sale online. The seller happened to attend the same school as me, so I went to his house to check it out. The guitar didn't have strings, but we agreed he'd put new ones on if I went downtown with him to buy them. While walking back, a random man approached us, asking for money. I ignored him, but he pulled out a handgun and said he was in charge of the area and we had to pay to pass through. I froze in shock, but the seller started arguing with the man. During the distraction, the seller told me to run. Without hesitation, I sprinted through the street, weaving between moving cars. I fully expected to hear a gunshot, but thankfully, it never came. Story 25. When I was a baby, my biological mother took out a life insurance policy on me, initially to take care of me. But as time passed, her intentions became darker. When I was 18 months old, she shook me violently, causing a swollen brain and bleeding eyes. My dad, who was in prison, noticed something was wrong when she brought me to visit him. He alerted the guards, and I was rushed to the ICU. Child Protective Services got involved, and my aunt fought to gain custody of me. My mother went to prison but continued her cycle of abuse after being released. When I was 3, she tried to beat me with a board that had a nail in it. As I grew older, she made attempts to manipulate her way back into my life, but I refused. To this day, I avoid any contact with her, and the mere sight of her sends me into a panic. She tried to kill me for the $500,000 life insurance payout, and the trauma of her actions still affects me. Story 26. When I was 16, I stayed at my older brother's house. Living there were my brother, his wife, their 2 children, and my sister's daughter. I was sleeping on the sofa since my brother and I had been playing Gran Turismo on the PlayStation late into the night. The weekend before, my brother hosted a small gathering with friends and family. Someone tried to gatecrash the party, started a fight, got beaten up, and left. On the following Thursday, when I was staying over, I woke up at 5 a.m. in the bathroom, blood pouring from my head. The bathtub was full of blood. Moments later, I found myself back downstairs in the living room, looking in the mirror, blood still gushing from my head. It was everywhere, on the furniture, walls, kids' toys, everything. The guy who had tried crashing the party the previous weekend returned, bringing a friend. They kicked the front door open. While his friend went upstairs to attack my brother, the main guy targeted me as I slept. He started hitting me on the head with a claw hammer, using the claw side. At some point, I woke up and instinctively kicked out, hitting him square in the nose and breaking it. He snarled, "That's the last thing you're gonna do, you little bastard." The next thing I knew, I was in the bathroom again. The police were called, and the attackers were caught shortly after, having dropped their weapons and face scarves. They were sentenced to 5 years each for attempted murder. Not long after getting out of jail, one of them committed suicide. Unfortunately, it wasn't the one who had attacked me. Story 27. About 10 years ago, I shared a 3-bedroom apartment with a friend. Since we had a spare room, my friend told me about an older guy he'd met, a philosophy book translator, who was looking for a place to stay. The extra money sounded good, so I agreed. The guy moved in, but he was very reclusive, so we didn't talk much. I started getting a weird vibe from him, though. One day, I had to attend a work meeting 3 hours earlier than usual. I got up, dressed, and left. Both my friend and the new roommate had already gone out, leaving the apartment empty. The meeting ended earlier than expected, so I decided to go home for lunch. When I arrived, I saw a fire truck outside the building. The doorman ran up to me, panicked, and explained that there was a gas leak in my apartment. The gas had been shut off for the entire building, and they were about to break in to investigate. Inside, I immediately smelled gas. In the kitchen, I found all the stove's valves open. I called my friend to explain what had happened. He tried reaching our roommate, but the guy didn't answer. I went to check his bedroom, and it was empty. He had packed all his stuff and left, apparently trying to asphyxiate us while we slept. I didn't pursue the matter, and we never heard from him again. Story 28. When I was 15, a schoolmate, whose brother I was friendly with, asked me to follow him to a lightly wooded area behind our school where kids usually went to smoke. Everything seemed normal as we made small talk. Once we arrived, I told him, "Hold on, I have to take a piss." I turned my back to him, and the next thing I felt was a hard punch to my upper right back. That punch turned out to be a stab, a deep stab with an 8-inch knife. He kindly informed me that I'd been stabbed and then pulled the knife out. Survival instinct kicked in, and I dropped to the ground pretending to be dead. Otherwise, he probably would have kept going. Once I fell, he stole my watch, a $200 fossil watch my mom had bought me during a vacation in Italy, and ran off. Later, he admitted he had stabbed me to pawn the watch and buy coca. As I got up, I realized something was wrong. I couldn't breathe. Luckily, my friends were behind the school when I emerged from the woods, yelling for help. At first, they thought I was joking, but one of them ran over after I collapsed and saw the blood pouring out. A teacher came to help, but her actions were almost disastrous. She made me lie on my stomach, which could have caused my lungs to flood with blood. Thankfully, I wasn't in that position long. They propped me up against the lockers at the back entrance, where I bled all over the wall. It took 25 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. Even with the oxygen mask, I was in immense pain. At the ER, the doctors made a 6-inch incision under my armpit to insert a chest tube. The sensation of the doctors holding my lung with their hands while I was awake, albeit under local anesthetic, is something I'll never forget. I still don't know why they didn't put me under entirely. By this time, my parents had arrived. My mom was hysterical, and my dad, who was working on a construction site, had rallied his co-workers to find the guy who stabbed me. They planned to kill him, but my mom managed to calm him down. I was a good kid, no drugs, no alcohol, no gangs. For a long time, I wondered, why me? Was a $200 watch worth it? I spent 2 weeks in the hospital's trauma unit and another couple of months recovering at home. The stitches often came undone, forcing me to revisit the ER. Public bleeding incidents were not fun. Physically, the incident left me with permanent nerve damage around my upper right back and arm. Psychologically, it didn't impact me as much as one might think. I was too young to fully grasp the weight of it. I was also told my lung could collapse randomly due to the traumatic pneumothorax. But it's been 15 years, and so far I've been okay. The guy who stabbed me was 17 and protected by Canada's Young Offenders Act. He didn't serve any jail time, just a few community service hours. It's baffling how dysfunctional the system is. Story 29. Over a decade ago when I was a kid, my family and I took a trip to Tanzania for a safari. One night near the Kenyan border, we were out spotlighting for bush babies when a pair of headlights appeared, blocking our car. A group of men with AK-47s got out of their truck, and our tour guide immediately dropped his head onto the steering wheel, keeping his hands visible. Being around 10 years old, I whined, "What's happening?" My parents, quietly but sternly, told me to shut up and stay down. Every time the armed men questioned our tour guide, he mumbled short responses without looking up. My mom later admitted she noticed some of the men staring at her and my sister, rubbing their crotches. After what felt like forever, though it was probably just 10 minutes, the men lowered their guns, got back into their vehicle, and drove away. When we pressed the tour guide for answers, he brushed it off, saying they were just game wardens looking for poachers. However, according to my parents' later research, it was likely a Kenyan militia group. These groups kidnap tourist groups to demand ransom from park owners, threatening to kill the hostages if their demands aren't met. If they don't get paid, they move on to the next group, often escalating their violence. Despite this being one of the more intense near-death experiences our family has faced, we laugh about it now because something terrible happens on nearly every trip we take. For example, in Israel and Egypt, we narrowly avoided bombings. In South Africa, we got stuck in a river with a territorial hippo, and later on a termite mound, while a leopard stalked us. In Tanzania, I unknowingly put my face near a boomslang. In India, something else happened, though I can't recall the details right now. Our friends now joke, "What happened this time?" whenever we return from a trip. Story 30. There's a bar my friends and I visit sometimes, a little dive out in the countryside. It's the kind of place where anything can happen. Some nights it's quiet, with pool games and a guy playing guitar. Other nights there's a fight or a screaming match. The drinks are cheap, and the unpredictability is part of the charm. One night, after a few drinks with old high school friends, I paid my tab and walked outside to my truck. One of my buddies was passed out in the truck, while another friend was inside paying his bill. That left me alone with the passed-out buddy's girlfriend. We were chatting when the bar door suddenly swung open. A short, stocky guy, maybe 5 feet tall, stormed out yelling, "Hey, mother, you think it's okay to disrespect a woman like that?" He charged at me while 3 women followed, trying to calm him down. I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, I don't know what you're talking about." He got up in my face, still yelling. I stood my ground and told him to back off. I guess he realized I wasn't going to back down because he stepped away, muttering, "Yeah, okay, bitch, okay." Then I saw him head for his car, and I knew what was coming. He pulled out a silver 1911 handgun and racked the slide. Normally, I'd have drawn my gun and shot him in self-defense, but I wasn't armed because I was at a bar. I did something risky. I put my hand behind my back like I was reaching for a weapon, pointed at him with my other hand and said, "If you point that gun at me, I will kill you right now." The buddy's girlfriend quickly added, "He's a veteran and he's armed." The guy froze, stared at me for a moment, then put the gun back in his car as the women surrounded him. A few minutes later, he came out and apologized, saying, "Sorry, dude. Thought you were someone else." Story 31. When I was 3 years old, my father threw me into a 6-foot deep pool and laughed as I drowned. I died for about 90 seconds before my mom pulled me out and revived me. Even now, I still fear water on my face. Edit. Some people have asked for more details. I'll share a brief version. My mom and dad were both deeply damaged in their own ways. My dad, however, was a monster behind closed doors. He abused my mom physically and emotionally, and eventually, he started on me. When I was 4, I walked in on him strangling her. He almost succeeded, but my mom fought back despite being 4'11" to his 6'3". Around the same time, the beatings and neglect began for me. One time I broke the needle on his record player and got beaten with a belt for it. Later, he started interfering with me sexually. Life was a cycle of violence, terror, and trauma until I was 9. That year, after a severe beating, my mom finally took me and left. The years that followed involved death threats, stalking, and being placed into hiding. I turned to weed, alcohol, and self-harm to cope, even attempting suicide multiple times. When I was 18, my mom fell into a coma on Christmas Day. She lost 11.5 years of memory. When she woke, she thought I was 7 and had no memory of my dad's abuse. I had to remind her of everything. I spent years rebuilding my life while helping her recover. Things eventually got better, but the scars, physical and emotional, remain. Story 32. When I was around 12, I had a friend who shared a room with his younger brother, who was disabled. In their room, they had a Super Nintendo, and the only place you could sit comfortably to see the TV and play was on the younger brother's bed. We used to sit there and play all the time, often with the younger brother in the room. It was never an issue until one particular day. That day, my friend's mom wasn't home, so it was just the three of us in the house. My friend and I were sitting on the edge of the younger brother's bed in our usual spot, playing SNES. Suddenly, the younger brother walked in and completely lost it. He started screaming and crying about us sitting on his bed, something that had never bothered him before. After a few minutes of this, he ran out of the room. It got quiet, and we thought it was over, until he came back through the door, slashing at the air with a big chef's knife from the kitchen, screaming, "Get off my Thomas!" My friend grabbed a long piece of sporting equipment to push him back out of the room, and I slammed the door shut. Since the door didn't have a lock, we had to take turns bracing it with our feet while his little brother wailed and stabbed at the other side. After about an hour, he tired himself out and went to watch TV in the living room. We didn't leave the room until their mom got home. When she saw the damage to the door, she immediately drove me home and asked me not to tell my parents. I never went back to their house and only hung out with my friend at my place from then on, far away from his younger brother. Story 33. My mom's ex was crazy. He had a therapist for his mental instability, and arguments between us were pretty common. One morning, though, things escalated. This time, he grabbed a pocket knife he had hidden away. We yelled at each other, and when he tried to brush past me to get to my mom, who was partially disabled and sitting on the couch, my instincts kicked in. I wasn't about to let him near her. I grabbed him by the shoulder, pulled him to the ground, secured the knife, and gave him a few hits to keep him down. That's when I felt warmth on my stomach, like I'd wet myself, but it wasn't on my pants. I realized I'd been stabbed. Adrenaline kept me going, though. I asked my mom to get me a warm compress and call 911. I lay on the floor, putting pressure on my stomach until help arrived. And where was the ex? In the kitchen, calmly fixing himself a cup of coffee. He looked genuinely shocked when the cops showed up and threw him to the ground. Like I said, crazy. I didn't feel any pain until after surgery. At the hospital, I found out I had a 6-inch laceration on my abdomen, a 3-inch cut on my ribs, and a 1-inch cut on the back of my right thigh. During a follow-up, the doctor explained that my belly fat had stopped the knife from causing internal damage. Turns out, being fat saved my life. Go figure. Story 34. My ex, who I'm convinced is a narcissist, snapped one night. He'd had a few beers and was sitting at the kitchen table when he started slamming his fists down on it. I had just put my 2 children to bed about an hour earlier, so I went over to ask him to stop, as the kids had school the next day. He got physical and started chasing me through the house. We had fought before, but it was usually brief. This time, it felt different. I decided to run outside to draw him away from the kids. He caught me just before I reached the door and started strangling me with both hands. I couldn't pry his hands off or push him away. My vision began to blur around the edges, and I knew I was about to die. In a desperate move, I threw a wild punch with everything I had. It landed squarely on his throat. He immediately dropped to the floor and passed out. The next day, he moved out. A few months later, I moved out of state. Story 35. I went to a Halloween party where my boyfriend at the time was, only to find him with another woman sitting on his lap. Furious, I confronted him, but he was too drunk to respond. Feeling humiliated, I left and went back to our shared mobile home, where I went to bed. I woke up to him dragging me out of bed by my hair, calling me a stupid cunt, and berating me for barging in on him, even though I was invited to the party. He threw me to the ground and punched me in the face. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the home phone, and ran to the bedroom. I locked the door and braced myself against it while trying to call my parents. He assumed I was calling the police, so he broke the door down on top of me. I managed to escape into the bathroom, locking that door as well. He crashed through that one too, but the door hit the counter, giving me just enough room to slip away. He grabbed me by my shirt and neck and slammed my head into the wall. I dropped the phone but managed to escape his grip and run out to his Toyota truck. I locked myself inside as he came after me, swinging a piece of rebar. I sped away as fast as I could, leaving everything behind. My parents didn't believe me when I told them what happened and even sided with him, saying I deserved it. To this day, I believe he would have killed me if he'd had a more dangerous weapon. Story 36. When I was 14, I was a runaway living on the streets. I hung out with a guy we'll call John, who invited me to stay in a hidden, abandoned apartment inside a closed parking garage where he was squatting. I wasn't interested in him romantically, so it was purely for a safe place to sleep. Everything was fine, and we went to sleep. Early the next morning, John woke me up saying the place was on fire. Smoke filled the room and flames blocked the doorway. We had to jump over the fire to escape, and when we finally made it out, we were covered in soot. I was so grateful to John for saving my life. I must have thanked him 100 times that day, and I thought about him long after I went back home a few weeks later. About a year later, I ran into two people I knew from the streets. During our chat, I asked if they knew what happened to John. That's when they told me something shocking. John had tried to kill a girl. He took her to that same parking garage, set it on fire, and at the last minute, changed his mind and ran back in to wake her up. That's when I realized John hadn't saved me out of kindness. He had chickened out on murdering me. It's one of the reasons I still struggle with trust issues to this day. Story 37. I used to work in a restaurant with a chef who had bipolar disorder but refused to take his medication, choosing instead to self-medicate with coca. One day he asked me to inform our boss that he was resigning. I did as he asked. The next day he came back, retracted his resignation, and accused me of lying. Thankfully, my boss didn't believe him because he trusted me. The chef eventually quit for real, and we had to run the restaurant with a limited menu. One day during a break between shifts, I was walking home when I saw a car speed past me. I didn't think much of it until the car suddenly reversed and veered toward me. In a split second, I jumped into a nearby garden just as the car screeched to a halt where I had been standing. The chef leaned out the window, screaming insults and blaming me for his resignation. He then reversed again, revved his engine, and came at me. I bolted out of the garden, but he followed me. A lorry driver saw what was happening, stopped at the junction, and shouted to ask if I was okay. The distraction gave me just enough time to run all the way home. When I got home, I collapsed in tears, bent over and struggling to breathe. Since then, I avoid getting involved in work conflicts. My boss is very protective of me, but I still have lingering fears. I'm terrified to walk alone and have nightmares about what could have happened if the lorry driver hadn't been there. It's left me with lasting anxiety, especially around chefs who lose their temper, something that happens more often than you'd think. Story 38. When I was 21, I was married and living in a beautiful home in North Carolina, surrounded by 122 acres of woods. My husband had a high-paying job that required him to travel often, and during one of his trips to New York, I stayed home with our chocolate lab, Sam. That experience scarred me for life, and I've never stayed home alone since. On the third night of his trip, I went to the grocery store around 8 p.m. On my way out, a man with broken English approached me, asking for money. I told him I didn't have cash, and he walked off, getting into a white cargo van. Later that night, I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up watching TV. At 1:30 a.m., loud banging on the front door made my heart race. I grabbed my husband's revolver and shotgun, terrified. The man from earlier was at the door, claiming his van had broken down and he needed gas money. His broken English gave him away. He banged on the door, tried to open it, and even attempted to get in through the windows. I screamed at him to leave, warning that I wouldn't hesitate to shoot. He eventually walked off the porch, and I ran upstairs to see him get back into the white van. This time, I noticed 5 other men inside, all wearing masks. They stayed in the driveway for a while before moving the van. I texted my father-in-law, and the police were called. They struggled to find the house, but when they arrived, they took my statement. An FBI agent later contacted me, explaining that this matched the tactics of human traffickers and that my appearance made me a target. He advised me to never go out alone at night again. The experience shook me to my core. I haven't stayed alone since. Story 39. On September 15, 1990, at around 9 p.m., I stopped at a dimly lit gas station parking lot on North Rivers Avenue in Charleston, South Carolina, to use a payphone and call my girlfriend. I had just graduated Navy boot camp and was stationed in Charleston. Unaware of the area, I didn't realize I was in a dangerous neighborhood. While I was on the phone, a man snuck up behind me and hit me in the back of the head with a baseball bat. I didn't see it coming. I lost consciousness for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. When I came to, I was about 10 feet from the phone, and the man was swinging the bat at me again. I dodged, managed to get up and ran. He didn't chase me. Instead, he calmly got into my car, started it, and sneered at me. Filled with adrenaline and rage, I grabbed a rock and fought him while he was in the driver's seat. Somehow, he lost the top half of his left ear during the scuffle, but he eventually got the car in gear and drove off. My girlfriend was still on the phone and heard the entire thing. I told her what happened and that I'd call her later. I started walking toward the hospital, and 2 Navy guys passing by gave me a ride. I suffered a fractured skull, a bruised chest, 27 stitches to the back of my head, and a severe concussion. The police found my car in another county a few days later, completely stripped. They also found the man's ear in the parking lot. Story 40. When I was 20, my close friend Josh, 18M, and I were stabbed in an unprovoked attack. He died within the hour, and I walked away with minor injuries. It was a brutally cold winter night, around -40 degrees. We attended a small apartment party with 10-15 people. We didn't know many people there, but got along with everyone, or so we thought. My friend and I started playing DJ, selecting music on the laptop connected to the speakers. One of the girls at the party didn't like our music choices and left with a male friend who turned out to be part of a gang. About 30 minutes later, the party ended, and we started walking to another event. We heard a honk behind us and saw the girl and her male friend pull up in their car. Thinking they were offering a ride in the freezing cold, we turned around and walked toward them. Without saying a word, the man grabbed Josh by the shoulder and stabbed him multiple times. Before I could react, he turned to me and stabbed me too. Josh died from his injuries within an hour. I survived, but it wasn't until the trial 3 years later that I learned the motive. The girl had lied to her friend, claiming we were part of a rival gang simply because she didn't like the music we played. Josh, I'll always love you, man. I'll never forget you. Rest in peace. Story 41. Back in 1979, my dad was a high school student living with his abusive aunt after losing his parents. His cousin Brian, who had a drinking problem and a nasty disposition, also lived there. Brian was the golden child of the family, and no matter what he did, my dad was always blamed and labeled as the bully. Brian stole money from my dad, planted drugs on him to try to get him arrested before he left for the Marines, and eventually even tried to have him killed. One night, as my dad was walking home from his late shift at McDonald's, a car veered off the road and onto the sidewalk, aiming straight for him. He jumped into a bush to avoid being hit. When he got up, he recognized the driver. It was one of Brian's friends, a known drunk. The driver, John, reversed the car and tried again to hit my dad. This went on for several minutes, with John driving on and off the sidewalk, trying to run him over. Finally, John crashed into a telephone pole, got out of the car, and chased my dad on foot, threatening to kill him. Fortunately, my dad was in good shape from preparing to join the Marines and managed to outrun John, eventually taking refuge at a local convenience store. My dad didn't report the incident to the police because he was leaving for the Marines soon, and his prior bad experiences with law enforcement discouraged him from seeking help. This incident, along with years of mistreatment, created a rift between my dad and his family, and he didn't speak to them for nearly a decade. When Brian passed away from cirrhosis in 2006, my dad's only words were that he hoped Brian was rotting in hell. Story 42. I was working as an assistant customer service associate at a grocery store, often working closing shifts. One night, about an hour before closing, my manager went outside to bring in carts. Over the headset, he asked me if my boyfriend had left a stuffed rose in my car door handle. I told him no, as my boyfriend didn't drive. He joked, "It must be one of your stalkers." But I felt uneasy. When the store quieted down, we checked the security footage. A car had pulled into the spot next to mine, and someone rolled down the window, placed the rose in my car door, and sped off. I didn't recognize the car. When it was time to leave, my manager walked me to my car. As I drove off, he called me frantically, saying the same car had been waiting in a nearby parking lot and sped through our lot trying to catch up to me. My phone died shortly after. Driving through a rural area, I realized someone was following me. I made a U-turn at an abandoned gas station, confirming it was the same car. Panicked, I drove 125 miles per hour down a back road until I lost him. I pulled into a stranger's driveway, turned off my lights, and hid for an hour before going home. When I called the police, they didn't take me seriously, saying there was nothing they could do since I hadn't been harmed. 2 days later, officers showed up at my house, telling me they had arrested a man with my driver's license, photos of me, and other personal items in his possession. He had been arrested under serious charges in another county. It turned out to be a man in his late 20s who often came into the store to buy Coronas and Newport cigarettes. He barely spoke English, but had always given me an uneasy feeling. I still think about that night and what could have happened if I hadn't noticed him following me. Story 43. When I was 17, I was the yearbook photographer and editor. A freshman friend came to me with a file on a jump drive, asking me to print something for him. Without checking it, I printed it and handed it to him. Then he asked me to proofread it. It was a suic note. As I read it, he came up behind me and started choking me. I passed out, but fortunately he left me there thinking I was dead. I regained consciousness, stumbled out of the print room, and found one of my teachers, who called for help. My father decided not to press charges, and the student was sent to live with his dad in California to work on his mental health. Years later, someone pointed out that he had tried to make it look like I had killed myself by printing and holding the note myself. Even after nearly 10 years, I panic if someone touches my neck. I once ran into him again, and it was horrific. I now live across the country but still dread seeing him again. Story 44. When I was 14, my brother tried to kill me. He was in the kitchen and I was in the attached room on the computer. He was talking loudly and asked a question. I casually responded, "I have no idea." He snapped, yelling that he was talking to himself, not me, and told me to shut up. Suddenly, he grabbed a large pair of scissors, opened them, and said he was going to slit my throat. He came at me, but I managed to run faster and lock myself in another room. He tried to break through the door, creating a large crack in it, but my parents came home just in time. I was terrified and told my mom what happened. Her response was that if it ever happened again, he would be kicked out. That was the end of it. It was completely ignored. The second time happened not long after. The four of us kids were playing a game and I was joking around with my sister. My brother told me to shut up, then grabbed a decorative sword off his bedroom wall and swung it at me. I moved fast enough that it hit my chair instead, and I bolted upstairs. When I told my parents, my mom stormed off, shouting, "Thanks for ruining Christmas." I was told I should just get over it. My mom later said, "What do you expect? He's family. Sometimes you let things go to hold the family together." To me, that might make sense for small disagreements, but this was life-threatening. Ignoring it made me feel like I didn't matter to them at all. I had to be around my brother for years after that, even though it caused immense emotional pain. Eventually, I cut ties with my family, not just because of this, but it was a significant part of why I couldn't trust them. The way it was handled left lasting scars. For years, I felt worthless, like my safety and life didn't matter. It messed me up more than I can put into words. Story 45. One night, a few friends and I were out really late when three drunk guys tried to jump us. The most aggressive one singled me out, probably because I was the only guy in our group, and started coming at me from across the street with his fists up. Two other guys were trailing behind him, and I couldn't tell if they planned to join in. The guy in front was shouting, "I'm gonna kill you! I'm gonna beat the S out of you!" punctuating his threats with racial slurs. I tried to de-escalate, telling him I didn't want any trouble, but he kept coming. When he got within about 15 feet of me, my fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. I had been holding my pocket knife behind my back, trying not to escalate things unnecessarily. But when I realized he wasn't going to stop, I whipped the knife out, pointed it at him, and screamed, "Get the F*** back or I'll slit your F throat." He froze immediately, and his friends started shouting, "Oh, S***, he's got a knife. He's just drunk, man. We're sorry." I took a moment to calm myself and told them not to follow us. Then my friends and I got out of there as fast as we could. It was terrifying, even though it never got physical. I was 17 at the time, weighed maybe 125 pounds soaking wet, and knew I wouldn't have stood a chance if we had actually fought. The incident left me shaken and anxious for weeks afterward.